Good morning, ladies. Welcome to our Wednesday morning, 9:30 a.m. Tanya Shir. We are studying still the first chapter of Tanya, or up to the words Achbir ha'inyan. If you have a lessons in Tanya in front of you, we're on page 44. On the left, page 44, toward the top of the page, where it says Achbir ha'inyan. So, of the many commentary that has been written on Sefer Tanya, of course, first of all by Rabbi Nesienu, by our Rebbes, then of course by the Chassidim over the generations, and by the Rebbe himself, of course. There's actually one of the commentaries on Tanya is written by the Tzemach Tzedek. Among his commentary on Tanya, the Tzemach Tzedek also wrote and printed something called Kitzurim, which is summaries of the ideas that is written in Tanya. And he has summaries of entire sections of Tanya, basically breaking it down, the main ideas. On the side of these summaries of Tanya, the Tzemach Tzedek wrote a summary of the summary. And when it comes to Perek Alef, he summarized the entire Perek Alef in 2 words. And the 2 words are shtei nefoshes, which translates to mean 2 souls. Now, what does that mean? We've been studying, so much for the past couple of weeks about all the different Gemaras and what's the definition of a tzaddik and what's the definition of a Beinani and understanding the difference between them, etc. True. But the essence of what Perek Alef Tanya has communicated, has revolutionized, if you will, which is actually what we're about to learn right now, is this idea that will become paramount, it will become critical. All of Chassidus is based on this. That every Yid, by birth, by virtue of birth, has 2 souls, 2 nefoshes. It's important, of course, to the rest of the structure of Tanya, because from here, the Alter Rebbe will go on to explain what is one nefesh, and then what is the other nefesh, and then how the battle works, and how to handle the battle, and what the battle accomplishes personally, spiritually, the purpose of it, etc. And really, from here, the rest of Chassidus also is like this, where so much of it is based in this idea of the Shtei Neshamas. So, again, I'm saying this, the Tzemach Tzedek wrote, is the summary, is really the point of the Tanya. We'll learn about it in Mirz Hashem a little bit today. Achbir ha'inyan, says the Alter Rebbe, the explanation of the idea. So again, until here we've learned that we're talking about different levels of Jews, right? In general, we have the highest level is a tzaddik, the lowest level in general is a rosh, in the middle you have a beini. So Alter Rebbe explained that it's not quite the way we understood, where a rosh or tzaddik means he has more mitzvahs than averis, and a rosh means he has more averis than mitzvahs, and a beini means it's 50-50. Alter Rebbe explained that's not possible, proved it from all different Gemaras, etc. Rather, what does it mean? A Rosh is somebody who has even one Aveira, one discretion, even a rabbinic Aveira, even stopping someone else from doing an Aveira, even just Bittul Torah, which the Gemara says, Ein Adam Nitzel Men B'chol Yom. One of those is enough to make a person a Rosh. Finished. A Tzaddik is somebody who has no Yetzer Hara B'chlal. Like the Gemara says about David HaMelech. It means not just he doesn't sin, he doesn't even have temptation to sin. He doesn't even want. A Beinani, the Alter Rebbe hasn't really explained but by default, by process of elimination, the definition becomes relatively clear. The Beinani is nishtahin and nishtaher. He's not a tzaddik who doesn't have a yetzer hara. He's not a tzaddik who doesn't have temptation. He has a temptation. The Beinani has temptation. But he's also not a Rasha who gives into his temptation even a little bit. So the Beinani is stuck right there, where he has the temptation, but he never gives into it. And again, at first, when you think about it, you're like, well, what's the purpose of that, right? I mean, imagine you have a car, right, with this incredibly powerful engine and it's stuck in neutral. So, you can't go anywhere, right? So what's the point? The Beinani has this incredible nefesh elokis and all the rest, and he has this incredible, he still has his Yetzer Hara, and his Yetzer Hara can still be pretty powerful. But he prevents it, he locks it in neutral, he prevents it from ever having any expression. Okay, this is the way Alter explains the Beinani. First when you hear it, you're like, that sounds horrible, that just sounds like a person who's stuck. But of course, once you think about it, you understand that from an avoida perspective, in other words, from the perspective of Rachmana Libaboy, the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to see the heart of the Yid, wants a Yid to sweat and work hard. We understand that the Beinani excels in this avoida element, perhaps never quite as successful as the tzaddik if we define success as removing the Yetzer Hara. In that sense, he's not successful. But in terms of the avoida of the personal, working hard and delving into himself and doing the avoida, in this sense, this becomes the icon personified by the Bein. Okay. Achbirin, to explain this idea, what does it mean? The tzaddik doesn't have a Yetzer Hara, a Bein he does, etc. Based on what was written by R Chaim Vital of blessed memory, Shara Kedusha, in a sefer called Shara Kedusha, R Chaim Shannon Perek Beis, where the R Chaim Vital writes over there, the L'chol Yisrael, every single Jew, Echad Tzadik v'Echad Rosh, be he a Tzadik, or be he a Rosha, Yesh Tei Neshamas, every Jew has two souls. As the pasuk says in Neshamas and Yasisi, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, I made Neshamas Loshen Rabim. Shehein Shtei Nefashos, which are the two souls, Nefesh Achas, one soul, we refer to as the Nefesh Abamis, Mitzad HaKlipa V'Sitra Achra, comes from Klipa V'Sitra Achra, comes from the dark side, comes from the side of negativity. And the Alter Rebbe will explain that. And later on in Perek Beis, the Alter Rebbe will say, Nefesh Hashenis, the second soul is the Chelek Alakah, is the Nefesh Elikis, as we'll learn in Mitzvah Shemida next week or the week after. So here's the Asoit. Here is the we're laying the concrete now, ladies and gentlemen, for the science. I don't mean that literally, Chas v'Shalom, but the scientific understanding of Chassidus Chabad. Here it is. R Chaim Vital writes B'Shara Kedusha, and in Eitz Chaim the L'chol Yisrael, that every Yid, be he a tzaddik or be he a Rosh, Yeshtei Neshamas, K'dichsiv Neshamas and Yasis. Okay. So to explain a little bit some of the ideas over here. So first of all, I want to tell you, when we were Bochrim in Yeshiva in Montreal, we had a very special mashpia. Maybe I've spoken about him in the past, I don't remember. I mean, a very, very special mashpia. So Hamalichtik Gan Eden. His name was Rebbe Zev Wolf Greenglass. Rabbi Greenglass. Now, he didn't let us call him Rabbi Greenglass. He didn't, he said to me, he always used to say, Ich bin nicht kein Reformer Rabbi, right? He said, I'm not a Reform Rabbi, don't call me Rabbi. He didn't let us call him Rabbi. Ruft mir Wolf, he would say, call me Wolf. Of course, we never had the chutzpah to call him Wolf. We would call him Reb Wolf. He was an incredible chassid. A great master, by the way, of Kabbalah in general, and Chassidus, of course, specifically. The Rebbe once referred to him as my Makubal. The Rebbe once referred to him as my Makubal, my Kabbalist. And just a very, very, all-around, very special person. I have very special memories of him. He would farbreng with us, and he would teach us Chassidus, and he was a chassid from a different generation. And books have been printed about him. An incredible person. So when he taught us this section of Tanya, if I remember correctly, was when he taught us this section of Tanya, he told us the story of R Chaim Vital. Who was R Chaim Vital? What really is the deal here? So, in short, the story is like this: the Arizal himself passed away in his 30s. If I remember correctly, the Arizal passed when he was 36 years old. Now, the Arizal, of course, completely revolutionized the world of Torah and Chassidus. Of learning of Kabbalah. But the Arizal had a very short amount of time. He passed at the age of 36. And the Arizal himself also did not write down any of his Kabbalah teachings. Nothing. Not only did he not write it down, but he refused to allow his Talmidim to write him down either. There's a sefer, in fact, called Shivchei Ho'ari. But largely it's stories about the Arizal. And the Arizal, it's brought over there that the Arizal did not let his students write his Torah. So it says there that one day, I believe one Shabbos, I think it says, they were in shul, and one of the Ari's Talmidim got an aliyah. And when he finished the aliyah, the Ari said to him, take out what you have in your pocket. So he pulled out in his pocket, he had manuscripts of where the Torah of the Ari had been written. And the Ari said, give it to me. The Arizal confiscated it. So the student said, how did you know that I had, writings in my pockets? The Arizal said there was a remez, I forgot what the remez was. In Shivchei Ari it says, there was a remez in one of the psukim that he had gotten in his aliyah that he had committed this crime of either writing or reading the writings of the Arizal. The Arizal didn't let any of his students write. The Arizal didn't let his students write. Now we have today what's called Kisvei HaArizal. Kisvei HaArizal means the writings of the Arizal. These were, number one, not written by the Ari himself, and number two, not all of them were officially sanctioned by the Ari. There was only one of the Arizal students who was officially, formally sanctioned and empowered to write down the Arizal's teachings, and that was R Chaim Vital. The other writings, the other manuscripts were v'mezakt illegal. And it's brought very famous, right? I think the Rebbe even spoke about it once, that there was controversy for a while because some of the writings of the Ari were not sanctioned. And anything other than Reb Chaim Vital never got the seal of approval. But after the Arizal passed away, all of a sudden, all of these manuscripts and writings began to surface, so to speak. And there was some discussion, bottom line, and of course there were variations between them, of course. Discussion became which were authentic, which were the real ones, which ones not, etc. But the Rebbe writes that in the end, they were all niskabel, they were all accepted, which means that in ruchnistic sense, they were all meant to be. Reb Chaim Vital came to the Arizal a year and a half, 18 months before the Arizal passed away. And the Arizal told him, you're going to be the scribe, you're going to be the author, you're going to be the one to write down all my teachings. And Reb Chaim Vital sat down in the Arizal's shiurim and he was teaching Kabbalah. And Rabbi Greenglass told us Reb Chaim Vital did not understand one word the Arizal was saying, garnished. He's supposed to be the Moshe Kibbel Torah Misinai v'mezok. Reb Chaim Vital receiving the Masorah from the Arizal, versteht nicht kein Wort, didn't understand a thing. So he came to the Arizal, he's like, I don't know what you want from me. I don't understand one word that you're saying. So the Arizal waited to Motzei Shabbos. The Arizal, of course, lived in Tzfas. The Arizal waited to Motzei Shabbos, and he took Reb Chaim Vital in a boat in the Tiberias River, in Tiberia. In the, what's it called? In the Kinneret. He took him for a boat ride in the Kinneret. As they went out on the water, the Arizal told him the following: that we know that the Jewish people, when they were 40 years in the desert, there's no irrigation, there's no water. So how did the Jews drink? How did they go to the mikveh? How did they wash themselves? What did they do? They had water, mibe'era shel Miriam. They had water from the well of Miriam, the water that came from a rock. Okay. After Miriam passed away, Chazal tell us very famously, the well dried up, the water dried up, Moshe Rabbeinu brought it out again. It came back after Miriam's passing in the zchus of Moshe Rabbeinu. All right. But the coming back in the zchus of Moshe Rabbeinu happened at the end of the 40 years in the desert. Not much longer after that, the Yidden went into Eretz Yisrael. So what happened to that well that was originally in the zchus of Miriam and then came back in the zchus of Moshe and Kleinigkeit? Where did it go? When the Jews went into Israel, into Eretz Yisrael, they didn't need it anymore, right? Because then they had actual irrigation. Irrigation, Eretz Yisrael, Limtara Shemaim Tishna Moim. They had rain. So what happened to the well of Miriam and Moshe? Where did it go? So actually, this part is not a chiddush of the Ari. This is not an innovation of the Ari. This is brought down in Sifrei Halacha, actually. So it says that it went, and this well of Miriam and Moshe went and hid itself in the waters of the world, in the oceans, in the rivers, in the seas. It hid itself in the rest of the water of the world, and there it remains hidden. But once a week, on Motzei Shabbos, it says, the water of the well of Miriam and Moshe travels throughout all of the waters of the world, briefly travels all the way around the world through the water, and then goes back into hiding. When does this happen? Motzei Shabbos. Motzei Shabbos, the well of Miriam and Moshe travels throughout all the waters of the world. And in Sforim it's brought down, this is the reason why many Yidden had a minhag on Motzei Shabbos to take a fresh cup of water from a source of living water and drink it. Right? Later the minhag became even to heat this cup of water, etc. All right, the Rebbe brings that the minhag Beis Harav in the Rabbeim's family they didn't do it, but the minhag is brought down in halacha. Many Yidden would have the minhag to drink a special fresh cup of water from a living source of water on Motzei Shabbos. Why? With the hope that B'Hashgacha Pratis they would succeed in capturing this moment with this cup of water. Because if you drink a cup of water that comes directly from the well of Miriam and Moshe Rabbeinu, you would be elevated in that moment to the same level as the Jews who lived in the generation of the Midbar of Miriam and Moshe Rabbeinu, who were known as the Dor Deya. The Dor Deya means the wisest of generations. They were blessed with wisdom. Where did they get the wisdom from? They got it through the drinking of this well. Every Motzei Shabbos, they would take a cup of water and daven and hope that they would win the lottery, that they would get this well of Miriam and Moshe. And with this, the Arizal says, but most people don't know where it is. With this, the Arizal stopped the boat at a certain point, and he took out a cup, and he dipped it into the Kinneret River at a certain moment in a particular place, and he scooped up the cup of water, and he gave it to R Chaim Vital, and he told him, here, make a brocha and drink it. This is water from the well of Miriam and Moshe Rabbeinu, and as you drink it, all the well springs of wisdom will open before you. And Rabbi Greenglass told us, Rabbi Chaim Vital made a bracha, shakol nir v'dvorei, and the Arizal answered amen, and he drank the water, and sure enough, the Arizal didn't need, the Arizal knew exactly the lottery number, so to speak, and he drank the water, and all the well springs of wisdom were open before him. And they traveled back home, and from that day on, the Arizal would teach Kabbalah, and Rabbi Chaim Vital would write it all down, and in the next 18 months, the Arizal taught him everything that the Arizal from his Torah wanted to be taught, and Rabbi Chaim Vital wrote it, and this is basically the bulk of what we have today, Kisvei Hu Arizal, the writings of the Ari, which serve, number one, primarily as the basis, as the foundation of all the teachings of Kabbalah upon which were built all of Torah Chassidus, and many of the minhagim that in general that many didn't have today, even those who don't necessarily associate themselves in a revealed way as Chassidim, but many minhagim like saying L'chun Ran on Friday night and going around the Bima and and Sukkot and all the rest of it, all come from the Arizal, and whose Torah was recorded through Reb Chaim Vital. So Reb Chaim Vital writes, B'Shar HaKdusha and in Eitz Chaim, quote, again, this is writing down the teachings of the Arizal, that every single Jew, echad tzaddik ve'echad rasha, be he a tzaddik or be he a rasha, every Yid has shtei neshamas. Nefesh achas, one nefesh, mitzad hakliba v'sitra achra, and another nefesh is a nefesh hashenis b'Yisrael, is a chelak alakam imal mamash. Okay. Now let's deal with the technicality. Next, let's deal with the technicality. There seems to be an open contradiction here, right? We just finished saying that the very definition of a tzaddik is a tzaddik has no yetzer hara. Right? So if a tzaddik has no yetzer hara, he's killed it, all right? Horgei b'tainis, he killed it through fasting. So then the next line we say, Reb Chaim Vital writes, since what we refer to as Kisvei Arizal, the L'cholish Yisrael, every Yid has Echad Tzaddik, and he says Echad Tzaddik V'echad Rosh Hashtei Neshames, Nefesh, this Nefesh and that Nefesh, but we just finished saying that the Tzaddik is Horgei b'tainis. And Tzaddik doesn't have two, and Tzaddik only has one. Right? So this seems like an open contradiction, but the answer to this is very simple. Yes, of course, a tzaddik killed his yetzer hara. Of course, that's the definition of a tzaddik. Because he killed his yetzer hara, he has no temptations, he doesn't have any inclination to do anything against the will of Hashem. Yes, of course. But a tzaddik is still a human being. A tzaddik is still a human being. A human being has a physical life. Right? A physical life. As a physical human being, he needs to eat, and he needs to drink, and he needs to sleep, and he needs to breathe, and needs to function as a physical human being functions. So this physical life needs to be empowered. It needs a nefesh. So yes, of course, in the case of a tzaddik, you wouldn't call it a yetzer hara. He killed a yetzer hara, right? Later in Mirza Hashem, we'll talk a little bit about the different nefesh abamis and yetzer, all the different terms. But yes, it's true, of course, a tzaddik doesn't have a yetzer hara, obviously. A tzaddik doesn't have any evil inclination or things like that, of course. But the tzaddik also has what we would sometimes call a nefesh hativis, or a nefesh achiyunis. In other words, a nefesh, a soul, that gives him physical life, of course. He also has a nefesh, a tzaddik primarily, a tzaddik lives primarily in his nefesh olakis, but he still has a nefesh achiyunis and a nefesh that keeps him physically alive. And a Rosh, on the other hand, although a Rosh is not perhaps aware of it, or we'd have a difficulty finding it, by virtue of being a Yid, he also has a nefesh elikis. Echad tzadik ve'echad rosha yesh shtei neshamas. Okay. Next point. The Alter Rebbe did not need to be mechad. It wasn't necessary for the Alter Rebbe to be mechadish to us, to innovate to us, that people, as human beings, we have different voices in our heads, right? One telling us to do good things, one challenging us. This wasn't necessary for the Alter Rebbe to tell us, because this we knew without the Alter Rebbe. Every person who has to make a decision, right, to eat a healthy breakfast or an unhealthy breakfast, to wake up on time or to sleep in, to whatever it is that we struggle with, to be on time, to show up late, whatever, we'll know that a human being has inner conflict. Das nicht the word. That's not the chidush over here. So what is the contribution that the Alter Rebbe is going to base all of Chassidus on? All of it. This Torah of the Arizal, the L'chol ish Yisrael echad tzadik v'echad rosha, is that the conflict. This is the way they explain it, and the words here that they use in the Sforim that explain Tanya, I believe they're 100%. I mean, who am I? But I believe they're 100% correct. The Alter Rebbe wants to stress here that the conflict, that every internal conflict that every Yid lives with, it's not a conflict simply with regard to what the person should do, what the person should say, even what the person should think. The conflict is a conflict over definition. Who am I? What am I? As a Yid, there's internal conflict, and very profound internal conflict, over the very definition. The nefesh habahamis, or if you're a tzaddik, the nefesh hachayunis, the nefesh hativis. The nefesh habahamis says, Ich bin a behema. I'm an animal. A sophisticated animal. A slightly sophisticated animal. A very sophisticated animal. A very coarse animal. But basically, in essence, I'm a behema. I'm selfish. I am self-preserving. I'm taking care of myself. I have needs. I have wants. They wish to make me this way. The Nefesh Habahamis says, don't try to convince yourself you're something that you're not. At my core, who am I? I'm a behemoth. I could be a very smart behemoth, but I'm a behemoth nonetheless. Say to the Nefesh Habahamis, do you have a Nefesh Elikis? Of course I have a Nefesh Elikis. The Nefesh Elikis is a connection to something outer worldly, something godly, somewhere out there of something. No, does it exist? The Nefesh Habahamis cannot contest the existence of the Nefesh Elikis. But the Nefesh Habahamis argues, that's not me. I am a behemoth. No, in the Nefesh Elikis. So again, the Nefesh Elikis, besides for the fact that it wants you to machshava dibur ma'aseh, to do and say and think everything that the Eibishter wants that he is supposed to do, das nicht the wort. That's not the real battle here. The Nefesh Elikis says, I'm not a behemoth. I'm a chelek elokah mimal mamash. Chelek elokah mimal mamash. That's very impressive. Right? The Nefesh Elikis argues. The Nefesh Elikis argues, that's my definition. That's who I am. This is a fierce and powerfully raging battle. And the consequences, my dear friends, could not be more significant. When I wake up in the morning and I say Moida'ani, when I'm behind closed doors and nobody's around, who am I? What am I? Am I a behemoth? Or am I a chelek elokah mimal mamash? This is the never-ending battle between the Nefesh Elikis and the Nefesh Habahamis, or in the case of the Tzaddik. It's again a Tzaddik on his level, obviously, but the Nefesh Hachayunis and the Nefesh Hativis. The Nefesh Habahamis agrees that the Nefesh Elikis exists, but the Nefesh Habahamis says that doesn't define me. The Nefesh Elikis agrees that the Nefesh Habahamis exists, but the Nefesh Elikis says that doesn't define me. May Hashem protect us. Sometimes people in life pick up bad habits. People pick up bad habits. Sometimes the habits are so prevailing that the habits are very difficult to break. Sometimes, Rahman al-Islam, the habit can be so deep that a person can even be the person can be addicted, right? To what? Addicted to bad behavior, eating badly, sleeping badly, wasting time, coming late, v'chulu, 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 v'chulu. A person challenges himself, I want to change my behavior. I want to do things differently, right? Every year, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur closes his eyes in shul and says in all sincerity, Rebbe Shalom, I want to do things differently. Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to change? Change the way we eat, again, simple life habits. Come on time, daven like a mensch. Why is it so? This talks a lot about this. Why is it so hard? We think, well, why is it so hard? Because, who doesn't want to eat chocolate chip cookies? Who doesn't want to sleep in? Who doesn't want to talk a gutta, geschmack, a shtika lashon hara? Right? The famous expression the guy said, I don't repeat lashon hara. So listen carefully the first time. It's tempting. Right, it's tempting. Chassidus says that's not the real issue. It's tempting. So you take you sit down and you think about it. You realize bad habits lead to bad results. No push it. If it's just that it was tempting, we'd be able to overcome it easier. People say, yeah, but it became a habit, a tempting habit. Also, we'd be able to overcome it. And say, but human beings are lazy. These things are all true. The Rebbe gave us a nature of lazy. As the Alter Rebbe, by the way, the Alter Rebbe will spell this all out in the next couple of lines. This is all Nefesh Abamis. The Nefesh Abamis is lazy. The Nefesh Abamis is depressed. The Nefesh Abamis is selfish. The Nefesh Abamis is arrogant. The Nefesh Abamis is all of these things. So why is it so difficult to combat? Chassidus says because there's a deeper battle going on. And once you conquer the deeper battle, all of these things become much easier. The Nefesh Abamis is not tempting you just with laziness. The Nefesh Abamis is not just telling you it's easy to be lazy, it's enjoyable to pursue a taiva to a temptation. No, that's nicht the word. The Nefesh Abamis says, don't fool yourself, you're a behemoth. Don't convince yourself you're somebody that you're not. This is who you are. Don't try to change. You can't run away from yourself. It's never going to work. Oh, that's the trump card. Pardon my expression. That's the trump card of the Nefesh Abamis to tell every one of us that we should see ourselves this way, to see ourselves the way the Nefesh Abamis sees ourselves this way. That's incredibly difficult to shake. On the other hand, it's so critical to shake because once we can shake that perception, definition of ourselves, from there on it becomes a whole different ballgame. The famous story of the Chassid of the Alter Rebbe who said, he doesn't sin because of his arrogance. You don't sin because of your arrogance. Arrogance is a sin. Arrogance is the greatest of all sins. What do you mean you don't sin because of his arrogance? He says, when the Yetzer Hara comes to me and tells me to sin, I say to the Yetzer Hara, do you know who I am? Excuse me, do you know who I am? I'm a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe. You're going to get me to sin? Everybody repeats the story, and it kind of makes you chuckle. But what's the wisdom of it? The wisdom of it, says the Alter Rebbe, is that the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Abamis are engaged in a brutal battle. And it's not and it's an ongoing battle, and it rests and it rages within us. Unless you're a tzaddik, and even a tzaddik on his level of limazot from the day we're born till 120. And the battle that rages is a battle over definition. Wer bin ich? Was bin ich? Well, who am I and what am I? Am I a chelek alakami mal mamash? Am I someone that the Eibishter loves, that is intrinsically and inherently divine and godly and unbreakable and unshakable? And no matter what I do, it'll never change. Am I truly eternal? Or chas v'sholom lahepech, am I a behemoth, here today, gone tomorrow, not significant, etc. The Chassidei Breslev repeat an incredible mashal. You all know it. I'm going to say it very bekitzer. An incredible mashal that feeds to this idea that there was a prince, the son of a king, who got a mental illness. What was the mental illness? He decided he was a chicken, a rooster. He decided he was a rooster. He took off all his clothes, covered himself in a few feathers, sat underneath the table, crawled around the house, pecked at seeds, cuckoo-ricooed like a rooster did, and that was it. The royal family. the prince, one day, the successor of the crown, in ganzen Meshuggah. They try talking to him, he won't talk, he won't use the restroom, he won't wear clothing. I mean, push it. The king looks high and low. A doctor to heal the prince. Nothing works. Until one doctor shows up and says, I'll heal the prince. I'll heal the prince. But you got to let me use my non-conventional methods. To say that the king is so desperate, blow shofar, take out the dibuk, whatever it's going to take. All right, the doctor says. Sure enough, the doctor takes off all of his clothing, covers himself with a couple of feathers, goes underneath the table, starts eating seeds, refusing to use the restroom, doing exactly what the prince does. And of course, for a couple of days, the prince ignores him. After a couple of days, the prince kind of, pecks his way over to him and starts communicating with him in some form. Basically, what are you doing? And the doctor goes to the prince, what are you doing? The prince goes, I'm a chicken, I'm a rooster. And the doctor goes, I'm also a chicken and a rooster. Azoy, shalom aleichem, aleichem shalom. Let's be chicken and roosters together. And so slowly the doctor wins the confidence and the trust of the prince Nebuch, who had completely lost his mind, as they hang out like two chickens sitting under the king's table, without clothing, eating seeds and relieving themselves like chickens and roosters. Needless to say, the king and his whole family are beyond horrified. Not only the prince is Meshuggah, now the psychologist is Eichet Meshuggah Nachalotzoros. Now, before we had one Meshuggah, and now we have two, but the doctor made a deal with them. You let me heal the prince, you let me do it my way, and they have no other ideas, so they let it go on. One day the prince wakes up in his, whatever it was that he was using as his, makeshift chicken coop. And he sees the doctor is wearing a pair of pants. He comes running over to the doctor. What's this? He tells the doctor. I thought you were a chicken. I am a chicken, says the doctor. But you're wearing pants, says the prince. Who, says the doctor? Who says a chicken can't wear a pair of pants? Welche Shulchan Aruch steht? Where does it say that a chicken can't wear a pants? Chicken can wear a pair of pants also. In fact, it's very comfortable. He tells the prince, you should try it. No, the prince says, I'm a chicken. Chickens don't wear pants. The doctor says, you'll see, there's nothing wrong. You can still be 100% a chicken and wear pants. Kids, the prince is very suspicious. But nothing else changes. The doctor, the psychologist, the prince doesn't know that he's a doctor, but this other chicken wears pants, and everything else he does like a chicken. He still eats like a chicken, still sleeps like a chicken, still relieves himself like a chicken, everything. After a couple of days, the prince says, you know what, let's try it. The prince tries on a pair of pants. Sure enough, turns out that the other chicken is right. You can be a chicken and still wear a pair of pants. Beseder. A couple of weeks later, a couple of months later, a shirt goes on. And again, the same process. A couple of months later, something else, a pair of shoes. And so slowly but surely over the course of a couple of months or a couple of years, the doctor nurses the prince back to health. He starts talking again, starts eating again, starts living like a human being, bit by bit by bit, until the prince is sitting at a table together with everybody else, and eating and drinking and sleeping and using the facilities like everybody else, like a perfectly healthy human being. One day, as they're all sitting at the table, the doctor tells the prince, he says, I have a confession to make. Yeah. He says, I'm a psychologist. I'm a mental health expert. I was hired by your family to cure you. No. He says, the doctor says, my job is done. I'm going back home. The prince says, cure me from what? He said, listen, you had this machla. You decided you were a chicken. You were sitting under the table, eating seeds and soiling yourself. And now, look, Baruch Hashem, you're better. And the prince looks at the psychologist and says, that was not a machla. That was not an illness. I really am a chicken. He says, I'm only doing this because a chicken can wear pants, and a chicken can wear a shirt, and a chicken can eat, and a chicken can sleep, and a chicken can shower and use the restroom, etc. But I'm really still a chicken. The psychologist puts his arm around the prince and says, my dear young man, he goes, look around. You eat like a human being. You talk like a human being. You sleep like a human being. You think like a human being. You're not a chicken. You're a human being. And with that, he healed the prince and he left. And the wisdom of the story, there's many, there's many elements to the wisdom of the story. But the idea is that the most difficult challenge for a person, the most difficult Mitzrayim to break out of, is the lie that the Nefesh Habamis tells us and repeats over and over again, that because I eat and an animal eats, and because I have temptations and an animal eats temptations, and because I have vulnerabilities and an animal has vulnerabilities, and because there's so many common denominators between myself and an animal, therefore I'm basically just be'etzem, in essence, I'm basically just a sophisticated animal. And Chassidus says, my dear friends, Perek Alef, page 1 of Tanya, this is the battle that every one of us wage on a daily basis. And every Yid, Kol Asher B'Shem Yisrael Yichuna B'Shem Chassid Yichuna, every Jew carries the name Yid and Chassid, has to look into the mirror and say every day, I am a Chelek Eloka Mimal Mamash. Sometimes I don't see it, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't feel it, sometimes I do. The Eibishter loves me unconditionally. I am indestructible. But I feel weak and insignificant. But it doesn't define me. I am a Chelek Eloka Mimal Mamash. Okay. Now, the battle would be difficult enough under normal circumstances. In other words, just the way I presented that itself would be difficult enough. To make the battle even more difficult, the first voice in our heads is actually the Nefesh Habamis. The Nefesh Habamis speaks first. The Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul, doesn't really enter the person's body, doesn't really have fight on a leveled playing field until the person reaches the age of Bar Bas Mitzvah. Which is why in Tanya the Nefesh Habamis is referred to Nefesh Achas, and the Nefesh Elokis is Nefesh Hashenis. Why Nefesh Hashenis? If the whole battle is over definition, so why say the Nefesh Elokis is the second? In other words, the Nefesh Elokis is not the second, it's the first. The Nefesh Habamis is the second. Of course it is, yes. But it doesn't speak first. It isn't present first. The first one is the Nefesh Habamis. And they said about one of the Chassidish Rebbes, I forgot who it was, that when he was a child, he displayed, even as a youngster, he displayed tremendous tzidkus, he displayed tremendous, he was a tremendous tzaddik as a child. So they came to him as a child, they said, we don't understand, you're 7, 8, 9 years old, how do these come to sein as großer tzaddik? You don't even get your nefesh elokis till your bar mitzvah. Right? We'll discuss this later in Mitzvah Shem. It comes up later. But even you don't really have an nefesh elokis till you turn 13. How are you 9 years old learning and you don't even have an nefesh elokis yet? He's a Chassidish Rebbe, a sharper, right? Very sharp. He said, I'll tell you, Poshet. He said, every day the nefesh Habamis comes to me and tries to tempt me. But do this, do that. So he said, I tell the nefesh Habamis that there's a din that a dayan, a judge, is not allowed to try a case unless both litigants are present. He said, I tell the Nefesh Habamis, I hear you, I hear what you're saying. I'd love to give a ruling, maybe even I'll side with you, right? Of course, he said that facetiously. Maybe I'll side with you. But we need a din Torah first. We need litigation. Can't litigate until the Nefesh Elokis shows up. We haven't given the Nefesh Elokis a voice yet. So he said, listen, in the meanwhile, I can't take you seriously. He's come back to me when I reach my bar mitzvah, then we'll talk. He said, I'd send the Nefesh Habamis away and I do whatever I want. It's a cute story. But the idea is that they wrestle over definition. Okay, nefesh achas, says the Alter Rebbe, the first nefesh, this nefesh that comes from klipa v'sitra achra, mislabesh is bedam adam. This is in the human being's blood. It's in his DNA. Lachis haguf, pasha to give his guf chayas. Right, that's what we said before. Even a tzaddik has one of these because a tzaddik also has a living body. The nefesh abasar is bedam. And from this nefesh Habamis boys come kol midas rois, all of the midas rois, all of the negative and dark character traits that a human being has, all come from the nefesh Habamis. From the 4 negative elements, right? We know the Eibishter created all of existence, all of physical existence and spiritual existence. Can be boiled down to 4 elements: Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar, fire, air, water, and dust, and earth. So the nefesh Habamis also has Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar. And each one of these four produce negative character traits that a person has to deal with. Tainu, kas v'gaiva, anger and arrogance, misoida eish, from fire, shenigva l'mayla, that constantly rises up, right? Like anger, which is hot, and arrogance, which is haughty. V'taiva satanugim, and lust, indulging in temptations, and soida mayim, from the element of water, ki amayim atzmichim kol minei tainu, because water makes all different types of delicacies and pleasures grow. So the water produces lust, water produces appetite for pleasure. The hoilulus, v'leitzonas v'hispirus. Hoilulus means frivolity. It's just, taking things too lightly. Leitzonas, making fun. Hispirus is empty boasting. Just the temptation of the nefesh habamis to engage in narishkeit, in shtuyot, misoid ruach. Va'atzlus, laziness and depression come inside offer. So all this is a gift. This is, so to speak, a gift that the Rebbe Shalom has given every one of us by virtue of giving us a nefesh habamis, that we struggle to one degree or another with all of these. Of course, every nefesh habamis is different, right? So some nefesh habamis, some animals are hotter, more hot, as in Hotter, hotter. They would give more temptation for anger and arrogance. Some are more wet. They give more temptation for lust. Some have more air, they give more temptation for, airy-fairy, for baba mices, for hoilus, for leitzonas. Some are more earthy, but then they have more temptation for laziness and depression, etc., etc. And so we battle this. We battle this because the nefesh habamis comes first. We're born, in other words, we're aware of the nefesh habamis before we're aware of the nefesh elokis. And the nefesh habamis wants us to believe that we are essentially behemoths, essentially animals, sophisticated animals, etc. All right. That's it for today. I want to conclude with a beautiful story of the Rebbe that I think touches upon this idea that Chassidus teaches us that you have to look at every yid as a chelik alakami mal mamash. So Shazar was the president of Israel, right? From 1960, he was appointed 1963, I believe, till 1973, something like that. Shazar had a very special relationship with the Rebbe. He came and he visited the Rebbe a few times, as is well known. Shazar was not a religious Jew by any stretch of the imagination. He wasn't an observant Jew. I don't even know if he was. Well, anyways, he had his own challenges, shall we say. But he had a very special relationship with the Rebbe. When he became president in 1963, the Rebbe spoke about his nomination as president by Farbrengen. This story I heard on a recording from Rabbi Leibel Shapiro Zayin Gesund Rosh Yeshiva in Miami, and it is, in my humble opinion, it is a crazy, unbelievable. The Rebbe spoke about Shazar's being appointed as president of Israel in the Farbrengen in 1963 on Shabbos, and the Rebbe said, I'm going to say something. And the Rebbe said, I know that what I'm about to say is going to get me into trouble. Not the Rebbe's words, obviously, but that idea. And the Rebbe said, the Rebbe said "mishtupt mir." It's an expression the Rebbe would use when he was being pushed, so to speak, milamaylo, to do things or say them. He says, "I'm being pushed. I have to say this." What is it? The Rebbe said the Gemara Yerushalmi says, "Kol ha'oila legedula." Anybody who is elevated to prominence and greatness, moichlin loyal kol avonos, all of his averos are forgiven. Even if he was, until then, I believe the Gemara says, even if he was a simple launderer, or not a money launderer, a clothing launderer, even if he had a very simple, lowly position, Zok the Rebbe, the Yerushalmi doesn't say what type of greatness it is. Any type of greatness, you're forgiven for all your sins. Says the Rebbe, if this is true about any prominent position, how much more so a person who is elevated to the position of being president of Israel? He's definitely forgiven for all of his sins. Now, it was a very controversial thing to say because, again, Shazar was not a religious Jew by any stretch of the imagination, and he knew better, right? He actually came from a Chabad family. His name his first name, his actual name, was Shmeir Zalman. That's the Shin Zayin from Shazar, named after the Alter Rebbe. So, if you're not a chassid of the Rebbe and the Rebbe says something like that, it sounds like the Rebbe is trying to be political, he's trying to say something nice about somebody he's hoping to form a connection with because he comes originally from Chabad, but saying something like out of control, that he's forgiven for all of his sins when the guy is, not from, and he knows better. It's not like he's a tinnik shenish, but he knows better. He was educated with it till he was in his teens. He was Lubavitcher Chassid. But the Rebbe said it. The Rebbe said it, and he said it by Fabrengen, and he said it in public. And the Rebbe said, "I know this is going to upset some people," but he said it anyways. Sure enough, a group of people, a group of religious Jews, known particular for their anti-Zionistic sentiments, they heard about this and they asked for a meeting, what we would call yechidus, with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe agreed to meet with him. They came in, Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom, sat down, very warm and friendly, yeah. And then the knives come out. And they said, we heard a shmua, we heard a rumor, that the Rebbe said such a thing about Shazar. Machal Shabbos, Eichel Nevelus Treifus. Machal Shabbos Befaresia. All of his sins are forgiven because he was Oil Gdul. And what kind of Gdul is this? A position in a secular government, in an anti-religious government at times. Is it true the Rebbe said this? The Rebbe said, yeah, it's true. I said, how could you say such a thing? How could you say so about such a Yid? So the Rebbe looks at them and the Rebbe says, I'm going to paraphrase because I wasn't there, but the Rebbe said, look, I'd love to have an intelligent conversation with you about this, Rebbe said. I'd love to debate this with you, or maybe not. Rebbe says, but did it ever occur to any of you that when I said this, I quoted a Yerushalmi? And the Rebbe said, you got issues with what I said? Take it up with the Yerushalmi. What do you want from me? I literally quoted a Yerushalmi. And the Rebbe said, I can show it to you inside. You got an issue with it? Talk to the Yerushalmi. All I did was quote the Yerushalmi, which is a very classic answer of the Rebbe. In other words, the Rebbe is a transparent conduit for the Eberster, for Lakus, for Torah. They said, Rebbe, keine halt nicht azoi. Nobody thinks that way. The Rebbe said, nobody thinks that way. Nobody thinks like the Yerushalmi. They said, Rebbe, it doesn't make any sense. The Rebbe said, so you were saying the Yerushalmi doesn't make sense. They said, Rebbe, it can't be true. He said, go argue with the Yerushalmi. Right? Torah, the Rebbe's Torah Semes. Once there's a source, you can't budge him. No, they see they're not getting anywhere with the Rebbe because the Rebbe found this for Shteit everybody else Shteit. By the Rebbe, what it says in Torah is emes all the way, no compromises. The Rebbe turned the tables on them, right? It was like, you're coming to challenge me, I'm not saying anything. You're not. The Rebbe says, you got no issues with me, you got issues with the Yerushalmi, take it up with the Yerushalmi, I'm in the Yerushalmi side. So, they pulled out their ballistic missiles. They had one more trump card, so to speak. They said, Rebbe, would you say the same about Ben Gurion? If you don't know the history, the power of this question is lost on you. But Ben Gurion was considered by the anti-Zionistic religious community as the Avi Avois Hatuma, as the biggest klippa that ever hit earth, because he was taka anti-religious, etc. And he founded the state of Israel. They said, Rebbe, would you say the same about Ben Gurion? In other words, you're going with the Yerushalmi? They challenged the Rebbe the other way. They're going with the Yerushalmi. Are you prepared to go with this Yerushalmi all the way? Will you say about Ben Gurion that really? And the story goes that the Rebbe's face became very serious, very serious. And the Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, Vos artos eich ad Eberster vet moichel sein af noch ein Yidden. The Rebbe said, why does it bother you so much that the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Eberster, will forgive one more Jew? What is your problem? A Yerushalmi is a Yerushalmi. Torah is Torah. Emes is Emes. A Lakus is a Lakus. If the Yerushalmi says, then that's the truth the way it is. Says the Rebbe, your pain over this, your distress over this, needs to be called into question. Look at yourselves in the mirror. Listen to what you're saying. Vos artosaich. Why does it rattle you? and bother you so much that the Eibishter will forgive one more Yid. Of course the Eibishter forgives him. Of course. That's the story. What's the depth of the story? There's two ways to look at a Yid. One way to look at it is to say, Du bist a beheme, ich bin a beheme, wir sind alle behemes, we're chickens. We soil ourselves, we humiliate ourselves, we eat seeds. We're behemoths if we sit at the table. So we're behemoths that sit at the table. Kommt zu gehen a Rebbe, kommt zu gehen Chassidus, and says, no! Am is zugebunden oben, we're tied above, we don't fall below. We're not sinners. We're not bad Jews. Yes, we have temptations, we have vulnerabilities, we have shortfalls. We're a chelek elekami mal mamash. And at every opportunity, the Rebbeinu Shalom embraces an opportunity to forgive a Yid, and to welcome a Yid, and to embrace them, and to bring them into Rebbeinu Shalom's fold. To see ourselves this way, the way Chassidus sees us, this becomes the battle, the ongoing battle, that is at the heart and the very definition of Torah's Chassidus Chabad and Sefer Tanya. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful week.